Okay, so I thought we'd try something a little bit different today with a bit of a lunchtime stream. Um, so, like I said previously, one of the things I really struggle with is kind of how to make time for the hobby. Um, and for me, this, I guess, is my attempt to fix that problem. Um, it may or may not work in the long run, but who knows? In the meantime, I figured I may as well stream it and see if I can make that to be the thing that forces me to forces me to actually do it. Um, my plan, I guess, for this bit of painting time in the middle of the day is really just to carry on with the same Marauder skelly that I was painting yesterday. Maybe try and get the bone on there. That's a fairly key part of any skeleton. Let's be honest, and then see what we can see how much more beyond that I can get done. For the base on the bone, I'm thinking of starting with Dust Bowl from Two Thin Coats. I quite like these. They've been pretty good. Pretty sort of thick and creamy straight out of the bottle, but not so much so that that they take a ton of dilution to get started. You can use them. I don't want to say you can use them straight out of the bottle, but you can, you can get a decent quality coat straight out of the bottle. You'd still, I would suggest, want to dilute them a little bit. The one problem I have had with them, I'll be honest, is getting the paint out of the tubes, which sounds really daft, but I don't know what it is. It just doesn't work for me. Like, genuinely, I just find that the what do you call it, like the agitator that's used, I guess, just sticks in the pot, which is a weird one, I grant you. It's a very weird one, but such is life. So let's see if I can get a nice base coat down on that. Like the previous one, just using the Artist Opus size 2 and 1 brushes for this. Let's see if we can get this to go down nicely. No, I must admit I've been pretty impressed with the Two Thin Coats range across the board. I don't think it's going to be to everyone's taste, and certainly it wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. Like, I'll be honest, I was, perhaps pessimistically kind of expecting a bit of a GW clone paint. Whereas I have found these to actually be maybe more similar to like a game colour consistency and approach to pigmentation. That's only obviously from a very amateur perspective. I'm not pretending to be a colour scientist or anything like that, but it's strikingly similar to early game colour. And to be clear, I'm saying that as a very, very positive thing. Like, early game colour remains some of my favourite paint to have ever been made. It was the first non-Games Workshop paint I ever used, and it really sold me on the idea of, looking beyond my local Games Workshop in terms of what I should buy, what I should use, and that led me down the road of kind of other paint manufacturers, but also eventually other games, other miniatures, and much more into the painting as a major part of my hobby rather than painting being the bit that comes before playing. I must admit, the one thing these these two thin coats paints do very well actually is thin without medium. I find that I have a habit of over thinning paint. Um, and this is why I tend to use mediums rather than just straight water. Mediums, I find, just make the whole thinning process a little more forgiving. Just because there's binder in there, obviously, that helps bring the pigment back together when it does just become that little bit too diluted. I mean, of all the problems to have, I mean, I could probably spend a very long time worrying about exactly how dilute my paints should be, but to put it quite simply, I've got bigger fish to fry in life than investing huge quantities of time worrying about that. The one thing you do have with these Marauder minis is, I guess, just due to the sculpting at the time, you end up with some very large areas of just kind of blank, flat fill that you have to figure out when painting in terms of what on earth it should be. Again, I think I spoke last time about the kind of character of these minis and how they're painting them is very different to painting really almost anything else for that exact reason. They've got a lot of what in modern casting and sculpting I guess would be described as flaws or limitations, but I must admit I find whenever I'm painting these it's quite enjoyable as a painter, I think, to have that freedom to decide how you're going to treat a certain area and not have every decision kind of made for you in advance. Strangely for a skeleton, 2 arms and a skull is it on this mini. Everything else bone-wise is covered up. So that is that, as they say, for the Dust Bowl base coat. I am slightly concerned that that is a very light brown to have started from. Perhaps a little lighter than I had thought it was. Yeah, in hindsight, I'm wondering if a wash over that, just to knock it back slightly, might be a good idea. But we'll let that dry and then come back to that. Next up, though, I want to get the base coat in on some of the leather here. For that, I'm going to use Scale 75 black leather. I really like the Scale 75 paints, especially around leather. I find the really matte finish just gives you a lot of control over how you can get a relatively simple mix of colours around leather to look worn or freshly made or cracked, or it gives you a lot of options for what can be a very dull part of a mini. I think for a very long time, leather was just that kind of bit where you go, oh yeah, paint it a flesh colour, chuck a Devlin mud wash on it, or whatever your brown wash of choice is, right, job done. It's only a bit of leather, don't worry about it. Whereas I got to be honest, now I find that I quite like to just take a little longer, really work it up, add in those little kind of scratched areas or whatever, those little bits of micro texture. I find make all the difference. Oh, I may have slightly over diluted this now. Mix a bit more paint in. There we go. I do still find that no matter how long I paint with one, this is still the danger of the wet palette, is it kind of promotes that sort of over hydration of paints. Makes it, certainly for me, it makes it very easy to over dilute them. Now I find the Scale 75 paints, they can take a lot of dilution anyway. I guess just due to the medium and binder that they're made with. But equally, I find they take better when diluted or when mixed with a matte medium rather than just with water. And again, previously I was speaking about like the magic mix stuff. That's one option, but even like where's the other one that I use? There we go. Like Liquitex matte medium. This stuff is absolutely fantastic. I find for scale 75 sort of paints, especially given that a bottle like this is maybe £6 or £7, and I mean I've gone through half the bottle in the last year. It's a real bargain compared to sort of mediums directly marketed towards miniature painters, which we all know we get kind of we get the equivalent of telling a venue that it's a wedding. The same product or the same service or the same venue magically becomes 10 times the price because it's for a specific use case. And to be fair, I think there's there are scenarios in which there are reasons for that. I mean, I think there's probably a better case for that being the case with miniature painting than there is for the case with weddings, to be perfectly honest with you. And there are some things that are incredibly niche about some of the products. AK Interactive have what is quite a what's the word? Quite an expensive. I can't remember what they call it. It's not paint stripper. It is. I have a bottle of it. One moment. It is odorless thinner for enamel products. There we go. Now, ultimately, all this is sort of odorless white spirits, or mineral spirits, I think it's sometimes called. They're not quite the same thing, but they're kind of similar. They're brilliant. This one's specifically for enamels. But I also use stuff like this. Bob Ross odorless thinner. These are great for oils. To be honest, these two things damn near interchangeable, except for the fact that the AK one is actually cheaper on this rare occasion. Now they are in some way different because they've got different warning labels on them, but you end up with so many things like this anyway, like the Vallejo brush cleaner and thinner for their alcohol-based paints, and the vast majority of this stuff I've found is interchangeable and is available like cheaper at an art supply store, whether it's things like Liquitex Medium or the Joe Sonia Magic Mix or whatever it might be. There's a lot of options out there to save a little bit of money when it comes to mediums, varnishes, etc., that kind of thing. So it kind of feels now that this is getting to that point where we've got enough colours on the model that it's starting to feel a little bit more like it's on the way to being done. I love that black leather colour. I think it's got a real kind of richness to it. Usually I take it from there into like the red leathers and that kind of thing. But actually, because of the desaturated look I'm going for on this particular model, I'm going to take it into more of a kind of walnut and birch colour. It's almost going to mirror the kind of cracked and decaying effect that you'd get on bone, or rather on skin that's been dried, because of course that's what leather is. We also need to I think it'll help when we knock the shine off the silvers and the armour. At the moment it's very, very bright, so a bit of a wash is really going to help with those. Looking at the bone, definitely going to hit that with a wash. So I think in fact it's probably about time to do exactly those things. I think I'm going to go with the if I can find them. Brown wash and black wash from Pro Acryl. Now again, these are new additions for me, but I am reliably informed that they are really good. What I'm not going to do though is drop them on my wet palette. Washes and wet palettes, as we all know, are not always the best of friends. Washes generally not much caring for additional dilution. Let me get that down and out of the way. So I'm thinking, let's start with the brown on the bone, and then we'll apply the black onto the chainmail, and I think onto the silver components of the armor. I am debating in my mind whether or not to apply the brown wash to the bronze areas. I'm currently erring on the side of no. I'm actually quite happy with the amount of depth that those sections have picked up. Not totally sold on that though, even as I say it out loud. We'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. First up though, let's get some brown wash onto the bone. Load that onto the old brush. That has got a very interesting colour to it. I'll be honest, it's not what I was expecting. I was expecting something with much more black in it. Like, this is quite an interesting brown wash. It might sound really silly. But obviously all these colours have got a lot of different colours mixed into them, right? In my last stream I spoke about my love of Timbits for the presence of purple in with those lovely tinny colours, and how, to my mind, no one else has yet come close to creating quite such a perfect colour as Timbits. But this is a very interesting brown wash. Again, I was expecting something much darker, much more black heavy. This has quite a large amount, I think, of like a yellowy tone in it. And actually, I mean, for my current purposes, that's perfect, because it's really lending itself into bringing up the bony colour in that brown that already existed, and I think is going to make the future layers really pop. Actually, I'm quite pleased with that. But that is sort of opening up an interesting question about what the black wash is now going to look like. As I say, give these a good mix, as I've not used them before. There we go. Let's see what the black comes out with. Okay. And I'm seeing some interesting tones in there straight away. Let's get that. Right, let's get that onto. There we go, and that's quite a light wash. I'm quite impressed with these. I'm always a little bit hesitant with washes. Like for me, the best washes I've ever used, maybe prior to these ones, were the original formula of Citadel wash. Back when they had the, I will admit, awful smells. Like, you could always tell if someone's opened a a pot of Badab Black nearby at some point in the recent past, because my god, the smell was awful. But you couldn't argue with the sort of what it looked like on the model. It's this wonderful balance of colour, and staining and movement, and just, yeah, they were really wonderful products. And I still wonder now actually what the thinking was behind the change in them, because like washes are a big deal, right, in the whole GW ecosystem, in terms of like how you paint. Um, so when they changed the washes, and they really changed how the washes work, I think it it kind of surprised me, if I'm honest. Like, I didn't think they would do something like that to what their approach to painting is such an important is what was such an important component of their painting technique. It really surprised me, and I don't think they're awful, but I personally now don't use them, just because I find the capillary action quite weak, and so they tend to stain surfaces quite a lot, and I just don't want that from a wash. I don't need that from a wash. If I want to stain surfaces with a wash, I'll slap an oil wash on them, but if I'm using an acrylic wash, I want it to go to the recesses. That's the whole point. At least to my mind, that's the whole point. As you can see, I've decided to risk it with this brown wash and just a couple of areas on this helmet. And more than anything, if I'm honest, I kind of just want to see what it does, just to get a little glimpse into how that might work. I'm not sure how these react with metallics, because they're quite, I wouldn't call them matte, they're maybe kind of low shine satin, maybe. Well, actually, as they dry, maybe they're actually not particularly low shine, actually. But already there, got a good amount of contrast now coming into the Mini, good amount of colours now in place. Starting to feel a little more like it's a real thing. Sorry, struggling a little bit with focus there. There we are. Yeah, it's starting to feel a bit more like a real thing. And I think once the bone gets done, that's gonna really pop in this across this Mini, largely because, of course, there's this it's quite dark. The whole main body of it is quite dark. What I am going to do, actually, as I'm here, is just slap some black wash onto these boots, because what that might allow me to do, which I hadn't really thought about until now, is come back in with the black leather and keep the boots much darker than I was otherwise thinking of going, by using that as the kind of sort of re-establishing highlight, rather than going up a value in the paints. Because the more I look, the more I think, those boots are going to become the brightest point on the bottom of the miniature, which is not ideal. In terms of bright points, really, I'm thinking the cloak, the bone, that's it. I am debating, there's like a little sash around his waist where his belt also goes, and I'm really debating painting it red. For no other reason than I look at this and just think, I could do with like a zing of colour somewhere, and I wonder if that's because the bone isn't done, in which case I should go, I think, with like a black and a dark brown in the middle, or should I kind of go for that? Yeah, have a nice strong bolt of colour right through the centre of the Mini. And I really can't decide. What I think I might do is just leave it for now and make a decision once we get there further down the road. Yeah, I think that's probably what we'll do, to be honest. That seems sensible. So in the meantime, I think what I'll now do is just start re-establishing some of the bone with that same colour, but leaving in a lot of that really nice recess wash. Really am very impressed, actually, with the kind of very rich tones that wash has introduced. Didn't really expect that, but it's a very positive addition from my perspective to this bone, and is certainly going to make my job a heck of a lot easier moving forwards. If that's just established all of that for me effectively, it saves me having to introduce a whole set of new colours to establish that kind of rich bone tones. And instead I can just come in like with everything else I've done on this Mini, be quite sort of sketch-like in my strokes, nothing too precise. Really just picking out the most relevant bits, or the bits that would catch the light. And especially where sort of later I fully intend to add this glow into the eyes. I don't want to spend a huge amount of effort painting detail that I know I plan to replace. So I think next up, let's hit that with some bone. This is part of the signature series again, Matt Sexfish. Really nice, I think, on the Pro Acryl range, where the primary and the expansions had some really great colours in them. Obviously, really solid kind of foundation of paints. The addition of these signature line paints, for me anyway, has been a bit of a game changer. Like, it's the first time I've seen a Mini manufacturer that has collaborated with great painters and let them really, seemingly really go to town. It's not just slap your name on some colours we were otherwise going to do. Like, they seem to have really allowed them to say, hey, actually, I would fundamentally change your formula for this paint and then make it this instead. And I find that with so many of these, like, that they've played with you know, something seemingly fundamental, whether it's like the finish, like this is very satin compared to Pro Acryl's usual sort of matte look. Like, I can't imagine too many other manufacturers allowing that freedom. I've certainly not seen it anyway. Again, I don't claim to know about all of them. So if you've seen some where they have, let me know, because I would actually love to sort of try some more paints out in that regard. I really like that you can. There's value in getting the extra sets. I often think, you know, especially when they're based on people, they're often just a way of trying to persuade people to, hey, you haven't bought paint in a while, so and so says these paints are worth a purchase because they got their name on them. come and, come and give us your money. I find that to often be why these things are done. Whereas with these, I mean, obviously, Monument Hobbies is a business. Of course, they've done it to try and make money. But beyond that, I do think they've tried to actually deliver some value that otherwise wasn't being delivered. I do think they have tried to, create some additions to their paint range through these collaborations that perhaps fit to certain styles of painting that they weren't looking after, or that that are incredibly niche and so often would never get launched. Like, let's be honest, when you're creating a product, you don't tend to start with the most niche possible version of your product. You start with what has broad appeal, what is going to continually make money. And don't get me wrong, so did they. Like, you've got your core set and your expansions. They've clearly identified, what people need from their base range. But then from there, they've really expanded with these collaborations to provide, I think, one of the most well-rounded selections of paints out there today. And I think a lot of that is to do with those collaborations. It's going to some of the best painters out there and saying, hey, what would be helpful? What don't you have, or what do you mix and make yourself on a regular basis? And there's for those who don't know me, I'm a product manager. It's kind of what we all dream of doing. It's that ability to go out there and say, hey, how can I make this better? And I think a willingness to learn from people who know best, the people doing the thing, is really wonderful to see. Now, I've gone backwards and forwards on the next layer on this bone, whether or not it should be ivory or bright warm grey. Now, I think I'm going to go for bright warm grey because the bone is actually a much warmer colour than I thought it was, and it's a nice colour, but it's kind of just brought that up to be a little bit too warm for my liking. It's kind of getting near the warmth of the... It's obviously not as bright and engaging as the bronze, but it is getting towards that level of warmth, and I really want that bone to look old and brittle and, not quite right. So I'm gonna go over to the warm grey. The bright warm grey. Which weirdly, I'll be honest, I don't think looks warm. Like, at all. I think it looks slightly green. And I suppose that's where maybe what's driving the idea that it's got a warmth to it. But yeah, it's a really kind of I would suggest quite unusual colour. It's almost like, if you remember it, rotting flesh in the kind of early to mid 2000s, I want to say early 2000s GW line. Rotting flesh was one of my favourite colours for mixing highlights, where I just wanted, and I guess it is warm in that regard. Like, you're brightening something, but you're adding warmth to it. And it feels weird to say that I'm adding warmth to this now, when that's kind of the exact opposite of what I want. But I feel like because it's being added through green as opposed to through yellow, it really doesn't create so much of an issue. Yeah, see, I quite like that. I feel like that's quite... I guess it's warm, but it's still thinking about that kind of saturation being the main driver here. I feel like this is quite a desaturated colour. There we go. And with this, I really am just picking out the kind of highest, sketchiest lines. Not getting whole sections. Yeah, I like that. That's worked well. That's really taken almost the creaminess out of the colour and given it a kind of slightly decaying, slightly unhappy look. I think what I might do though is go back in then with another wash. Not heavily, mind you, I think just very slight, very slowly applied. Because there is still surface staining with these monument ones. I think it's one thing where I've still just not seen anything come close to those original Games Workshop washes, in terms of how little surface staining they created. Like, they created some, of course, but it really was very little compared to what we now see as sort of standard surface staining. And it's a shame, I think, that, you know, maybe it's because of those kind of organic components that made them smell. You know, in all seriousness, like that, if that's the trade-off, I totally get why businesses have, no one else has really done it, because the smell was bad. And unexpected, I'm not going to lie. You know, certainly the first time I opened it, I thought there was something wrong with it. But that is, I think, for this lunchtime, getting on to be all we're going to get done. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with that. That's decent progress. The bone is in. The wash is on. The base for the leather is down. I think the brown wash has sat quite nicely in the bronze. Like, it hasn't really done anything. I think that's if I had a gripe, that would be it. Whereas the black on the silver has done a really nice job of adding some depth. It's done a good job of blending the stippling in on the armour as well, so I'm really pleased with that. Yeah, I feel like that's going to be enough for today. I'm going to try and do these lunchtime streams at least maybe 3, maybe even 4 or 5 times a week. 5 times a week is every day at that point, let's be honest. I guess we'll just see how it goes, but most importantly for me, it's making time for some hobbies. So anything you'd like to see in terms of improvement or any tips based on my awful painting in this video, you know, let me know. The comments are there for a chat.